So after a few too many issues with my cheap Trifox carbon bike frame, a couple of months back, I decided to retire it. So I've actually had this bike build behind me lined up for ages. New frame and new electronic Wheeltop Groupset. Yeah, I was really excited to put this thing together. So the build went fine, although there were one or two issues there. But this Wheeltop Electronic Groupset, well, there's good and bad, but in all honesty, it has been quite frustrating actually. So yeah, let's get into it. My name, as always, is Luke. Yes, later on, I will be auditioning for the part of a children's TV presenter in 1995. And welcome back to Trace Fellow. Right, first up, let me run you through the parts for this bike build, and bear in mind some of the bits have been cannibalized from that Trifox bike that I just mentioned. So Wheeltop EDS-TX Groupset, Shimano Ice-Tech rotors, Arando carbon bottle cage from AliExpress, ZTTO T47 bottom bracket, Rero carbon crankset, Costello clipless pedals, SRAM 11-speed chain, a lightweight Rero cassette that I covered in the last video, a carbon saddle from AliExpress, a Trifox bar and stem, Physique bar tape that I had in the cupboard, and finally, this wicked looking frame from OG Evkin. It's called their key-on-key frame, or at least I think that's how you pronounce it, and yeah, I bought it with my own cash, direct from China. So yeah, this isn't sponsored by them or anything like that, and visually it looks quite similar actually to another frame that I bought from OG Evkin on AliExpress a couple of years ago, their CF-025 model, and for what I paid, that thing has been absolutely phenomenal actually, so I'm hoping this new frame follows suit. It's a really nice looking endurance style frame with fully internal cable routing. Here's the weight for anyone that's interested. I bought it directly from their website, cost me just over 600 quid, but yeah, it looks amazing, so let's get building. Now quickly, last episode I asked about this bar and stem from Trifox. The frame I'm using for this build is fully internally routed, so I wanted to try and run the brake cables you can see underneath here through the inside of the stem to keep things really tidy. Now I needed to drill some holes in it, so I asked you lot what you thought. Now Hambini actually responded. He said it's probably fine, just heat up the aluminium before you do it. So that's exactly what I did. I marked where the holes needed to be, slapped it in the oven to heat it up as per the recommendation, and started drilling. And yes, that was a lot of burnt cheese at the bottom there. No further questions. I even nicely chamfered the hole and spent a good few minutes knocking the edges down with some jeweler's files to make sure the brake hose wouldn't catch on anything. Okay, so I've drilled one hole in here and I've chamfered it really nicely with some needle files to kind of reduce friction as much as possible. And I've been test fitting it onto the bar here, and it's in exactly the right place for the brake hose to feed through. So I've got a spare bit of brake hose here. But as I'm doing it, I can already tell it's gonna be a massive pain to kind of route these cables through, because, you know, brake hose is quite flexible, but it's not like a bit of string. You can't kind of easily feed it through really sharp corners. So with the limited amount of access I can see myself having inside this stem, it's not worth the hassle. So yeah, unfortunately I'm gonna abandon this now to save my sanity later on. So yeah, I abandoned that pretty quickly, and in retrospect I'm very pleased that I did. Anyway, on to the build. So the first step, let's get the brakes fitted. Now feeding the hoses through the frame was fine, easy peasy, and the group set comes with the standard mounting hardware, so getting the brakes mounted front and back wasn't a problem. Next up, the fork and headset, and you can see the frame came with everything that I needed. Now interestingly, the headset bearings are labelled up and down, but it turns out these are actually mislabeled. It's the other way around, so the down bearing goes in the top of the headset. Anyway, slap the crown race on the fork, get the bearing on there, get some grease applied, and get it fitted up to the frame. Now there's a preload spacer that gets fitted onto the steerer tube, and this top cap comes with a hole in the front for the brake hoses to exit the frame. So with that sorted, I can grab some headset spacers, get them on, fit the handlebar and stem, and score the line where I'll be cutting the carbon steerer tube. Now to get this done, I clamp two odd stems to that steerer tube to guide the hacksaw, and I try and cut about 5 to 8 millimeters below that line I scored. Now, as it happens, I didn't do a good job here.
That was dreadful.
So the end of the cut was really rough. The hacksaw kept drifting and I had to file it flat. So yeah, maybe next time I'll get the proper tool. Right, the wheels. So I'm using these Drive 50D ones that I've covered previously. So just pumped up the tires, got the discs fitted and slapped on that cassette. Next up, shifters. These were actually super easy to install. They're totally wireless, so no cables to deal with, which is great. Plus, I love it when you can fit an Allen key easily under the rubber around the side of the shifter to secure them onto the bars. It makes life so much easier. Anyway, I'm just setting up the height here and the shifters are fitted. Okay, cool. So we have made some really good progress actually. So next step is to pull the brake hoses through this integrated bar. And if you look at the end here, they've got this kind of like hole on this cap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a gear cable, thread that through that hole that's on the end, and then use the gear cable to kind of pull this brake hose through and get it where it's needed. So yeah, let's give it a go. So turns out that didn't work at all. The combination of this cap and the cable end was a bit too big to fit through the small holes in the integrated bar, so I just fed them through manually. Next, I cut the brake hose to length, fitted the barb, the clamping nut and the olive, and got all that plumbed into the shifter, which was much easier with the shifter removed actually. But anyway, with all that done, let's bleed these brakes. Okay, so hoses are all cut and set up, so everything's plumbed in. It's time to bleed these brakes, right? And I'm just kind of having a play around trying to figure out how to do it. I watched the video that Wheeltop has on this, which is pretty good actually. And the one thing which is a little bit, it's not difficult, but it's kind of more tricky, is the fact that the bleed port is so far back up here. So you've got to peel the rubber really far back to expose this bleed port. In addition, they gave, they give you this. On the video, this kind of, you use this and pop it in the bleed port. But if you look, there are no threads in there. There's threads on the bottom, so you can kind of screw it into the shifter, but there are no threads in there. So what I would normally do is then I'd put this cup on the top, right? That's got some threads on. Can you see that there? It's got a set of threads, but that isn't threaded. So I'm not really sure what use that is on a standard bleed kit. So luckily within the kit that I've got, this is a kind of basic bleed kit, it had this kind of extended bit here, so I was able to put that in, and then I can kind of jerry rig it so I can just pop that cup on the end there and still have basically the same setup. So a little bit strange, but it shouldn't be too difficult, and I suspect bleeding is going to be exactly the same as any other hydraulic group set. It's just the setting it up is a little bit strange. So yeah, this little brass piece, I don't see that being of much use to the majority of people. Anyway, that's done, so I'm going to try and bleed these brakes. So wish me luck. Now, bleeding the brakes was incredibly straightforward. Maybe the easiest hydraulic group set that I've ever bled, actually. As mentioned, Wheeltop have a quick 4-minute video which covers it all, and I'll stick that in the description. But as long as you have a basic bleed kit with that extended piece, it's easy peasy. Okay, so bleeding the brakes, actually super straightforward. No surprises really. Apart from that difficulty of access to the bleed port in there, you really had to struggle to pull the hoods back. But once that was sorted, yeah, really no problems. So next up, I'm going to get the crankset and the bottom bracket fitted, get the derailleurs mounted, get the saddle on, do the bar tape, and we are finished. So I reckon 1 more hour and this thing will be buttoned up. Right then, after a bit of time this afternoon working on this thing, yeah, we're finished. And have a look at that. How good does that look? I was a little unsure actually when I was choosing the frame what color to go for, and I went for red and black because it's kind of a seemingly a nice choice, but I was a little uncertain how it would all come out. But it looks so good, doesn't it? Looks really mean. So yeah, it went together really well. This frame was an absolute dream to work on, so I'm hoping it rides nicely. Group set went on really well. Really helps that the batteries are actually on the derailleurs and there's not a separate one in the seat post. That really kind of speeds things up. But yeah, how good does that look? I've got a little bit of faffing to do with the indexing of the gears. I need to kind of set the individual gears and stuff, but it all works. So yeah, looks the business. I'm so chuffed with it. But I've got the scales here. So yeah, let's get this thing on the scales and do a final weigh-in. Okay, right, let's turn that on. Now, I think if I was to guess, I'd probably say about 7.8 kilos, because the T47 bottom bracket in there is a little bit heavier than a standard one. And this setup at the front, this stem is quite chunky. But I've got everything on here, so let's get this on the scales. So if I load that on, like so, 7.59. That's really good. I was convinced it was going to be more than that, especially for a large 58 centimeter frame and 50 millimeter deep section wheels. Yeah, that's not half bad. 7.590. Yeah, so there we go. Just over 7.5 kilos for such a mean looking bike. Right, I'm going to get these gears sorted out and I'm going to get on the road.
Also, for those wondering, total build cost, about 2.5 grand. Not too bad at all, as long as everything works.
The garage is an absolute mess right now, so I'm filming this in my kitchen. So Siroko are back to sponsor another episode. They make some great value cycle kit, and I've worn their stuff for years at this point, and right now I wear this on pretty much every ride. It's their SRX Pro jersey. Super lightweight construction and great quality materials. This one I'm wearing has been in and out of the wash like 20, 30 times by this point, and it still looks nearly brand new. Plus it comes in loads of colors and you can pick it up for like 50 quid right now. And as for the bib shorts, it's these every time. They're BX bib shorts, super comfortable and great padding. But if you wanted something a little more budget friendly, you can pick up these Aspen bib shorts and one of their M2 jerseys for just over 80 quid. Now, I hate to say it, but autumn isn't too far away either, so you might want to consider some long sleeve jerseys. These M4 thermal jerseys are fantastic. Possibly a cycle vest or a gilet helps keep the rain off and packs up really small, or even some bib tights. These Envelaria bib tights are really great, and I've worn them over the last 2 winter seasons. But Siroko do all sorts of cycle gear. It looks really stylish and it's great value, so use my link in the description for 10% off the entire site, and it helps me, you know, with the channel as well, which is cool. Anyway, thanks for listening. Let's get back to it. So look, the build went really well. The frame was fantastic to work on, and the bike rides well too. But right here, it's where my frustration with this group set began. After that clip, I spent about an hour sat on the floor down there trying to get the gears indexed and then went out. Here are a few snippets of that first shakedown ride. Right, another stop to faff about with the front derailleur here. I think I managed to stop it rubbing. I mean, the chain line isn't even that extreme. Right, another stop to sort out the indexing on the rear derailleur. Right, another stop to sort out the shifting at the back again. Right, another stop to index the gears at the back. Well, at least someone's excited about the new build. Just me? Alrighty. Now, when I got back, I wasn't happy, so I spent ages playing around with the front derailleur, trying to eliminate the chain rub up at the front. I actually pulled the cranks on and off several times, trying to sort it, adding spacers and stuff like that, and actually in the process broke that carbon crankset that I was running. I over-torqued this retention bolt and it just snapped clean off inside it. Now, it does look a little bit flimsy, like the walls of that aluminium are quite thin, but I can definitely fix it and I'll cover that at the end. But for now, I needed a new crankset, so I fished this one out of my spares bin and got it slapped on the bike. Now, I've had this bike here built up for a few weeks at this point. I've done a lot of riding and I've also spent a lot of time trying to get the shifting sorted on this group set. But it's not just the indexing, so let me talk you through some of the other things that I've faced with this group set. Okay, so here are all the things that I've noted with this group set. So for the front derailleur, the only thing that you can change within the app is the window within which the front derailleur shifts. So you do this within the initial calibration part of the app, so you can basically set that window a little bit further out or a little bit further inwards towards the bike. However, you can't change the size of that shifting window within the app, so making it narrower or wider. And importantly, you also can't adjust the automatic trim positions that this front derailleur uses. So let me show you. As I'm moving through the cassette here, the front derailleur automatically trims, in this case inwards, to kind of avoid chain rub, which is great, but the issue I'm having is that regardless of how much I fiddle with it, I get chain rub here in this scenario, first gear. And also this position, so large chainring midway through the cassette here. As I'm moving down into the lower gears, this front derailleur trims inwards slightly, but it's not enough, and again, I get chain rub. So I want to adjust that trim position that it uses. But if I go into that part of the app where I kind of should be able to do that, I basically get this notification. So it basically says here to use the initial calibration function, so change where that shifting window happens, and then use the high and low limit screws that are on the front derailleur. I can't actually go in and change any of those values and adjust those trim positions. Now, all that those limit screws do is narrow that shifting window really, which in my case isn't actually all that helpful. I need the window a touch wider actually, if anything. But regardless, not being able to adjust those trim positions is really frustrating. It's software, there's nothing mechanically here that means those can't be changed. But looking at it, even if I could change them, what do these 6 numbers mean? And why does the first one start at 50? And not 0. And that leads me on to another point. The design of the app on the whole is not very intuitive. I won't labor the point too much, but here are some examples. So for one, the translations are a bit iffy, but you can find your way around easily enough. In equipment debugging, which should probably be called drivetrain adjustments or something like that, you can change the cassette speed. You've got that initial calibration bit, so change the shifting window. Then you've got gear shift and fine tuning gears. These last two do pretty much the same thing. So indexing the cassette, you can either do this gear by gear in the gear shift area, or you can see all the gears in one place for some reason in fine tuning gears. But yeah, adjusting these values does exactly the same thing. Now the numbers themselves are quite arbitrary, but essentially 0 is the starting point, which in this case is the rear derailleur sat on the smallest 11th sprocket at the back. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but gear 1 is gear 11 in reality, so the numbers are inverted. And whenever you change that figure to kind of adjust the indexing, the rear derailleur doesn't move to that new position until you shift out and then shift back into the gear. Only then does it kind of recognize that new value. So that just makes the whole process a little bit more time consuming. Also, when you're in the small chainring, you can't shift any higher, any further than this gear right here, which is fine. It kind of stops that chain being too far out of whack. But it doesn't do this at the opposite end of the scale. So I'm in the large chainring here, I can shift all the way down into the smallest sprocket, no problem. Now the chain does rub on the inside of the front derailleur cage here, quite badly actually, but it's odd that it would protect the chain line at one end of the scale, but not the other. Now shifting at the back is rapid, no issues there, but moving from the small to the large chainring, I found the front derailleur to be a little bit slow. It's noticeable on a fast-paced ride or when you need to be really nimble in heavy traffic. You kind of hit the shift and need to give the group set a beat and let it engage before you kind of get the power down, if you see what I mean. Now, I mentioned this, but the rubber on the hoods is very difficult to pull back when you're bleeding the brakes. I actually pulled back the nail on my index finger doing it the first time, which was quite painful. And finally, the shifters do rattle a little bit on rougher roads. So look, regarding all of those issues, I'm willing to overlook pretty much everything apart from that front derailleur. The lack of adjustability and the fact I can't eliminate that chain rub, it does hold it back. But look, I am willing to concede maybe it's my setup. I don't have a particularly standard cassette nor standard chain rings up at the front either. So maybe my chain line is a little bit too far out of the norm. I mean, a lot of other reviewers that have looked at this group set haven't reported this issue, but it's what I've experienced on my bike. So after faffing around with this thing for so long, I was kind of ready to write this group set off. But I had a chat with Grant over at GC Performance. He's been using this group set for a while and he sort of reset my expectations a bit. He's been into bike biz a hot minute and kind of deals with big name group sets day in, day out, and pointed out that for like 500 quid, what you get is pretty incredible. Fully wireless electronic shifting with decent hydraulic brakes that can accommodate anything from 3 to 13 speeds at the back. If this thing had been released in 2019, for example, even with a bit of chain rub at the front, it would have been absolutely groundbreaking, which is very true. And look, to give credit, braking is fantastic. Ergonomically, the shifters are very comfortable. It's incredibly straightforward to set it up on the bike and bleed the hydraulic brakes. Once it's indexed, the shifting at the back is nice, fast, and reliable. Judging by this review from the Ribble Valley Cyclist, long-term durability seems pretty decent. Plus, with my kind of non-standard parts, you might not even face the chain rub issues on the front derailleur that I've had on my bike. So no, it doesn't really match current Ultegra Di2, for example, in terms of shifting performance, but to expect it to is a little bit naive, I think. What it ultimately offers is more choice for you lot, right? Electronic shifting from the big three is incredibly expensive. Group sets like this are really disruptive and offer a similar experience at a much lower cost. So to compare it directly to Shimano's Di2, when they've had over 15 years and spent millions of dollars on R&D to refine their group sets, it's a little bit unfair, and I was definitely guilty of that coming in to this review. A more fair comparison will be something like L2's ERX group set. The price points are much more similar. I think the L2 probably has a bit of an edge for me, but I'm going to have to spend a bit more time with this group set to come to a more solid conclusion. So there we are. Hopefully I've given you kind of a balanced insight into what this thing is like. Yes, there are some teething problems, but there's still a lot to like with this group set. With that in mind, it's definitely staying on the bike. I'm going to put some decent mileage through this thing, and I think maybe if I fiddle around with that front derailleur a little bit more, maybe change the angle, I might be able to eliminate most of that chain rub. We'll see. But for now, I'm going to go for a ride on my bike with a mechanical group set. Right, subscribe if you like this kind of thing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. And if you've got any questions, comments, suggestions, anything, leave me a comment. Right, see you next time. Ciao.
It's the bonus clip time.
Okay, so this is the Rero carbon crankset that I'm trying to fix. You can see that broken bolt in there. But in order to get that out and basically replace it, I need to get this top cover off. And you can see I've been kind of, it's a bit mangled because I've been working on it, trying to get it off. I was under the impression that this was was basically identical to what SRAM uses on their dub cranksets. So this is, basically one from a SRAM dub crankset. And the issue is, the spacing of these indentations is slightly larger than this one here. This seems to be non-standard. So you can buy an official removal tool for these caps for a few quid, but the problem is that won't work because basically these are spaced slightly wider apart than these ones here. So I came up with a solution. Basically, I was hacking at it, trying to kind of like use a hammer and this like nail to kind of slowly work this round and get it loosened off. But I came up with a better solution. Basically, what I've done is on these two holes here, that one there and that one there, I drilled straight through them, and I've done this. So what I've done is I've got my vise here and I've put two drill bits in there, the same spacing as those two holes that I've kind of drilled through. So now what I can do is pop that on there and wrench it off. So let me show you. Right, I think this could be up there with one of my best hacks or bodges actually. So I'll line those holes up, and it's left-hand threaded. So basically it undoes the opposite way to a regular bolt or regular screw. So I'll get this undone like so. And with that loose, I can get that off like so. So that's the cap removed. And I can get this out, and I can I can buy replacement ones of these. It's a SRAM M15 crankset bolt, so I'll get one of those. I can slap it in there, reuse this cap, and this crankset is back in business. Okay, so I bought myself a replacement retention bolt and top cap on eBay. I think these cost me just under 10 quid for a SRAM crankset. So this is an M15 retention bolt and an M26 top cap. Now this retention bolt fits in there absolutely fine, and the walls of the aluminium, if I show you, they're a little bit thicker than the original as well, so this should be a little bit more durable, which is great. But this top cap, it's right hand threaded, so I couldn't find a left hand threaded M26 top cap. So again, this appears to be non-standard in both the spacing of those indentations and the fact it's left hand threaded. So yeah, if you are going to make this repair and accidentally break your retention bolt as well, you can find replacement ones of these with relative ease. That's not a problem, but you might need to reclaim the top cap and use that drilling method that I showed. But either way, with that new retention bolt on this cap, we're back in business. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.